Alright kids, we're going to do the second 6 weeks review. The first directions say classify each system and determine the number of solutions. Remember, in order to classify it, you're going to have to put it in y equals, so we'll label each line. We're going to put this one in y equals form. So negative y, bring the 2x to the other side. Then change the sign of everything because you don't want a negative y. Now for line 2, again solve for y. So you'll have 3y equals, move the x over to the other side, negative x minus 8. Then divide everything by 3. So y equals negative 1/3 x minus 8/3. Then you're going to take a look at both slopes. So this is the slope line. The first line is 2, the slope of the second line is negative 1/3. So they are just regular lines that are going to cross. They don't have the same slope. So they are considered to be independent, okay, consistent, and they have one solution. Now, remember, if they have the same slope, okay, they're parallel, which they have no solution, right? Or they'll be considered inconsistent. So let's try this one. On number 2, this slope is already given to us. So let's find the slope of line 2. We're going to move the x over, so we're going to have 2y equals negative 4x minus 6. Divide everything by 2. Right? Here you'll notice that they have the exact same slope, right? They're not the same line. All right? If they're the same line, then they would be considered independent. So they would be considered dependent and consistent. Dependent and consistent. They're not the same line. They just have the same slope. So they are parallel, which means they'll never cross, right? So they're considered inconsistent and they have no solution. All right, solve by graphing. Remember, you have to, this one's equal and this one is less than or greater than. So these are going to be 2 lines, and their answer is where they cross, okay? And these are going to be shaded, and the answer is where they are both shaded. So starting with the first one, solve for y. So you'll have negative 2y equals negative x plus 6. Divide by negative 2. So you're at 1/2 x minus 3. That's your first line. Line 2, if you solve for y, you would get negative 3x plus 4. If we graph both lines, line 1 is going to start at negative 3 and have a slope of 1/2. So here's your line. Label it line 1. Then for line 2, it starts at 4 and has a slope of negative 3. Okay, so the solution is where they crossed, which is 2, negative 2. In other words, that's the point that makes both equations true. And that makes them independent, right? Consistent. All right, for the next one. Number 1 is already solved, so let's graph it. Remember, we're going to shade, so you're going to start at 2 and your slope is negative 3. It's not an equal, so it's a dashed line. And it says less than. Less than means jump down, so you're going to shade here. For number 2, we're going to solve it for y, which means you're going to divide everything by 2. When you graph this line, you're going to start at negative 5. Your slope is 1. I'm sorry, your slope is 3. And it's dashed as well. It says y is greater than. Okay, so you're on this line, y is greater than, that means jump up. So technically you would shade everything from here over. But the only part that's shaded is right here. So your answer is where they would both be shaded, which would be this section here. And then I'm going to erase this because it's not the answer. All right, number 5. On the test, remember, there'll be lots of solving, and it's going to ask you specifically each method. So this is solved by substitution. Remember, that's where you find a problem that has a variable that has no leading coefficient. So in my opinion, I would start here and solve for x. There's 1,000 different ways, but that's just how I'm going to do this one. So I'm going to say, okay, I know that this means that x is the same thing as negative 2y minus 7. Then I know x represents negative 2y minus 7, so I'm going to take this negative 2y minus 7 and put it in for x on the other equation. That way, all I'll have is y's. So 4, and instead of x, I'm going to write negative 2y minus 7 minus 3y equals negative 6. If you look at the equation now, all you have are y's, right? And then so just solve for y. So negative 8y minus 28 minus 3y equals negative 6. Combine like terms. So you have negative 11y, and then you're going to move the 28 to the other side. So therefore, y is negative 2. Now that you know y, you know half your answer. So in your ordered pair, they're going to cross at negative 2. To find x, I personally would take it and plug it in over here, because you already know x equals this. So take this and plug it in. X equals negative 2 times negative 2 minus 7. Therefore, x equals negative 3. And then you can plug it in and check. You can plug in 4 times negative 3 minus negative 3 times negative 2 and make sure you get negative 6. You can plug them into both. Right, the next one is solved by elimination. That's where you want to eliminate a variable. Well, if you take a look, remember they have to be the same coefficient. So 2 and 6, 5 and 3, nothing works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose to get rid of the x's, because if I multiply this by negative 3, they will become negative 6. So that's the fastest way. So I'm going to multiply this by negative 3, which is going to give me negative 6x plus 15y equals negative 39. Let me just rewrite this one beside it. The x's cancel, and you're left with 18y equals negative 29. This answer is really messy. So when you divide by y, you end up with negative 29 over 18. Okay, so that's half your answer. To solve the other part, you're going to take this and plug it in. And it doesn't matter where, but I know this is my y value. So if I plug it in for this one, I'm going to say 6x plus 3 times negative 29 over 18 equals 10. Simplify this part first. Okay, so put this over 1, this is a 6. So you're going to do 6 times 29. So you'll have 6x minus 174 equals 10. Add 174, so you get 184. Okay, guys, I'm sorry. Let's back up a little bit to here. I just made a mistake. I apologize. This would make 1 and 6. I put my 6 in the wrong spot. So now you're going to have 6x plus negative 29 over 6 equals 10. I'm sorry. So then when you move your 29, 6 over, you get 31 over 6. So 31 over 6 divided by 6. Okay, then 89 over 6, divide both sides by 6, and you end up with 89 over 36. Very messy answer. But when you go back and plug it in, they both work. All right, Cramer's rule. Okay, I'm not sure what you remember about Cramer's rule, but remember we're going to solve for x, and we're going to solve for y. When you solve for x, okay, you replace the answers. Instead of using 3 and negative 4, you're going to do 1 and negative 32. And the bottom stays 3, negative 4. And your y's, you just do 2, 5 twice. Then remember, to find the problem, you start here and you take 1 times 5, right, which is 5, and you subtract negative 32 times 2. So you end up with 69 over, and you do the same thing here. 3 times 5 is 15, and then you subtract negative 8, giving you 23. Then you do 69 divided by 23, so your x value is 3. For y, you're going to do the same thing, but this time you leave all your x's the same. So 3, negative 4, 3, negative 4. And because I'm solving for y, instead of using 2, 5, I'm going to use 1, negative 32. And then the bottom, I keep 2, 5. Now the cool thing about it, you have already found the determinant on the bottom, so the 23 stays the same. Now all you have to do is find this one. So 3 times negative 32 will give you negative 96 minus negative 4 times 1. That's negative 4. So you're actually adding. So you end up with negative 92 over 23, which is negative 4. All right, flip it over for number 8. So we're finished with the first part of Unit 3, right? So 1 through 7 was like problems from Unit 3 test. So 8 through 20 is more recent stuff that we just took on your last test. For number 8, you're going to FOIL here and then here, or distribute, right? And then combine like terms. So 2/3 x times 3x is going to give us 2x cubed. And then here is going to give us minus 6x squared y. And last, you get minus 10x cubed y squared. In the next part, be very careful and keep in mind that this is a negative 3/4. Right, which is going to give us negative 6x cubed minus 12x squared y, and then your last stop would be plus 9x cubed y squared. And then you just combine like terms. So your cubes go together, giving you negative 4x cubed. Your x squared y's are going to go together, giving us negative 6x squared y. And lastly, your x cubed y squareds, giving you negative x cubed y squared. And then you box your simplified answer. Number 9, you're dividing by a monomial. Remember, so all you do is just reduce. So you take this and you divide it, which is going to give you 2a to the 4th. Then you look at the middle, which is going to give us 7a squared over 5, because these don't simplify very well, but you can cancel the a's. Minus, lastly, negative 3. 10 is kind of long because you're going to take this huge 4-term polynomial and multiply it by a binomial. So you've got to FOIL each one. So you end up with 6x to the 4th plus 4x cubed plus 9x cubed plus 6x squared minus 12x squared minus 8x minus 15x minus 10. You have to take each one, and you go to this, and you do both, right? Then you take the negative 4x to both. And lastly, your 5, which you'll do to both as well. You combine like terms. You end up with 6x to the 4th, 13x cubed, minus 6x squared minus 23x minus 10. These cubes and these squares were put together. Synthetic division, right? Don't forget But when you do synthetic division, you have to change the sign. So you're going to put a 2 here, and then it's the one that you use all the coefficients. You're going to have a 3, a -8, an 8, and a -8. You add 3 times 2 is 6, gives you -2. 2 times -2 is -4, which is 4. 4 times 2 is 8, which is 0. There's no remainder, so your answer, then you started with m cubed. So we're going to say 3m squared minus 2m plus 4. And if you wanted to check it, you can multiply this times this and get your final answer. All right, long division, 2x plus 3, and divide it in 2. Make sure you have a spot for every term, a cubed, a squared, an x, and a constant, so you're good. You don't have to fill any place values. Remember, if you're missing one, don't forget to put in your 0. Nothing goes here, so we're going to start with 2x squared. Remember, 2x squared times 2x is 4x cubed, and then you have to do it this way too. So plus 6x squared. You subtract. Be careful. 4 minus 4 is gone. 12 minus 6 is 6x squared. Bring down your x. Then you ask yourself, you want 2x to fit into 6x squared, right? So you're going to need 3x, so plus 3x. Again, you multiply it by both. 3x and 2x is 6x squared. And 3x and 3 is 9x. You subtract. 6 minus 6 is gone. X minus 9 is -8x. Bring down your -14. Again, you want 2x to fit into -8x, which means you need -4. -4 times 2x is -8x, and -4 times 3 is -12. Negative minus negative cancels. -14, this really turns a positive, so you get a -2. So to write your answer, you're going to say 2x squared plus 3x minus 4, which comes from here, but you have a remainder. So -2, and put the remainder over the 2x plus 3. All right, last problems down here, the factoring. If you take a look at this, okay, it's a binomial, right? And so, but you can notice that you can take something out. So factor out your x and a y. You get 64x cubed minus 125y cubed. Okay, much prettier, right? Now these are perfect cubes. So the cube root of 64 is 4x, and the cube root of 125 is 5y. In other words, 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. 5 times 5 times 5 is 125. Right, this is your sofas, right? So you're going to start with your xy. Don't forget to bring that down and put it in your answer. Then your first, because it's perfect cubes, right, you end up with a binomial, right, a 2-term, and a 3-term. That's your sofas. So your 2 terms is just these. So 4x minus 5y. Your sofas, square the first term, which is 16x squared. Opposite, so you're going to put a plus. Your 2 factors would give you 20xy. Remember, you multiply them together. A stands for your add, and you square this one, which is 25y squared. And that's your answer, these 3 terms. Right, the next one, again, is 2 terms, but this time they're not perfect squares. They're perfect, I'm sorry, not perfect cubes. They're perfect squares. So that's the little bit easier one. They don't have a GCF. The square root of 9 would be 3x. The square root of 64 is 8y. So since they're perfect squares, we just write 3x plus 8y and 3x minus 8y. And you look at them carefully to be sure you can't factor them again, and you're done. Number 15. Again, a 6, a 32, and a 10. Okay, I can pull something out of there, and they all have an x term. So you're going to always look for your GCF first, and this time it's 2. So if you divide this by 2x, you get 3x squared minus 16x plus 5. Some kids are still having trouble with factoring if you have a leading coefficient. Remember, that's where you have to make the t-chart. Drop your 2x down into your answer. You don't want to forget it. And when you factor this, let's see what happens. If your t-chart here, you want numbers that are going to add to give you your middle term still, and multiply to give you 3 times 5, which is 15. So they're a 1 and a 15. Right, what are you going to divide by? You're going to divide by your 3x. So one of your answers is here, 3x plus 1. And your other answer reduces, so it's just x plus 5. And you can check it. 2x times 3x times x is 6x cubed. Right, the next one, also you can factor a 5 out of it, so you always try to start there if you can. X squared minus 2x minus 15. This is an easier one to factor because it doesn't have a leading coefficient. So drop your 5 down and then just factor numbers that add to give you 2 and multiply to give you 15. Put your x in your x. So 5 times 3 is 15. You want a negative 2. So there's your signs. 17 has 4 terms, so that's your factor by grouping. You're going to factor an x out of the first one, which gives you x plus 2. And you're going to factor a negative y. Remember, if it leads with a negative, you factor a negative out. So negative y, leaving you with x. It's going to change that sign to plus. Okay, now this means you have x times x plus 2 and negative y times x plus 2. So write your answer more simplified. We want an x and a y, and we multiply both of them times x plus 2. Think about that. X times x and x plus 2, and negative y times x and a 2. Alright, the next one, number 18, you want numbers to add to get 15 and multiply to get 25. Factors of 25 are 1 and 25, and 5 and 5. Neither of those make 15, so this one's just prime. Don't overthink it, guys. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Alright, for 19, you want to graph the polynomial. I'm going to graph it over here. Right? This is a squared, so it touches. This is a 1, so it crosses. So I'm going to go over to negative 2, because the 0, negative 2 is what makes that 0. And we go here to 1. Now I have to decide the nature. Well, there's a 2 and there's a 1. So the degree of this polynomial is 3. And if you have a degree of 3, your nature, remember, is like x cubed. It's going to go up on this side and down on the left. Now you have to find where it crosses on the y-intercept. So you're looking for the 0. So you're going to plug in p of 0. I'm going to plug in 0 everywhere I see an x. So 0 plus 2 squared times 0 minus 1. 2 squared is 4 times negative 1. So you get negative 4. That's your 0. Be sure to either label it or put your marks there. This is negative 2, 1, negative 4. Then you just follow the directions. You start down here. It says to touch at negative 2, so I'm going to touch it. Right, make a turn. Pass through here, and it says to cross at this one. Right, number 20. Given the zeros, write a polynomial in factored and standard form. Factored form, let's call it p of x. Just write the factors. Remember they're the opposites. X plus 2. That's the factor. That's the root or the 0. Okay, this is the factor, and then x plus 1. So this is factored form. If you want it in standard form, you actually have to FOIL it all out. But keep in mind, you can only FOIL 2 at a time. So I'm going to multiply these two together first. Right, which is going to give me x squared, when I simplify it, minus x minus 6. Then I now have to multiply it times this x plus 1. Right, which is going to give me, you have to FOIL it. So x cubed plus x squared minus x minus 6x minus 6. Then combine like terms. These cancel. So you get x cubed, these put together, minus 7x minus 6. So this one is actually in standard form. Alright, and that's it. You're ready for your 6 weeks test. You might want to look over your quizzes. That might help as well.